Hey everybody. So I thought this was a really interesting research paper. I'm not sure how much it will get picked up by the wider media, but to me it's interesting. So it's called The False Dawn Reevaluating Google's Reinforcement Learning for Chip Macro Placement, and it's by Dr. Igor Markov. And you'll notice it. So in the about the author, he gives like all of his credentials and his background: IEEE, scientist, professor at University of Michigan, Stanford, etc. And then at the very like he's like also I work for Meta and like Meta Facebook. Like at the very end of the description, but as he lays out here, like the work reported here started when the author was affiliated with the University of Michigan, but opinions presented here are the author's and do not represent his past, current, or future employers. So I think like he's like very like distinctly made specific callouts within the release of this paper to not make it associated with Meta or anything related to Meta or Facebook. It's this author particularly in his opinions, but so beyond all of the other background, his background is very specifically in chip manufacturing, and then so I think it's like seems very qualified to call out an issue such as this. So essentially, what the paper outlines is, and what the paper claims is that Google researchers were very egregious in the way that they presented findings in a paper that was presented in the journal Nature in 2021. And then at the end of this paper, they state that the journal Nature is currently investigating all of this, and that they're essentially have sided initially with these findings, and then so it will be interesting to see how that plays out. I don't want to speak anything for the journal Nature, or I don't know what their exact stance is, but it does mention this specifically at the end of the paper. But so this paper, he goes through some pretty like damning evidence as to what he points out as flaws within the Google study and what they did. So very first thing that he points out is unsubstantiated claims and ungenerous reporting. So I agree with this overall, and it's one of my big issues with corporate release of AI is that you'll notice if you read through papers and you look at releases and you look at AI development in general, there does tend to be a big difference between a corporate release and an open source release that was released via like multiple research institutions. And then I think like people in general, they have this opinion that it's generally the opposite. Because generally when you think of open source, you think of like someone in their basement, like just, doing whatever they want. But in this instance, open source is generally like large academic institutions that are working together and or in cooperation with corporations, whereas the corporate reports and the corporate papers that are released and the corporate products, they're just on their own. There's no peer review or anything like that, and so that's a large part of what this paper calls for in the end is for more peer review of corporate releases and for corporations to make sure that they're not cutting that corner as far as making sure that they're actually documenting and releasing their actual results and their findings, and not trying to stand behind like just like corporate like trying to maintain their corporate IP without explaining without that explainability factor. And I think that's what a lot of the regulatory policies and things like that you look for are all around that, because everyone is pointing to it as a big issue. Second thing that they point to is a flawed optimization proxy, and then so essentially what he's referring to and calling out here is that he's saying that like some of the like methodology utilized in the training was actually like flawed, and that the like chip design itself, the This third one here I think is actually particularly interesting, use of handicap techniques. He says, to researchers familiar with mixed size placement, the proposed methodology looked handicapped in its reliance on multiple outdated techniques, making it difficult to improve state of the art. So like he calls it out like very explicitly and saying that essentially that they like handicapped their baseline results in order to show like with handicap baseline results like far improved metrics over the norm. And then they dive further into that with 3.4 with questionable baselines, and then just lay out like even more accusations. And then beyond that, he goes into a few pages of additional evidence against all of this. And then essentially lays out in the last part here, can the work actually be used? And his answer is no. He points out, this is responses to the paper and critiques of the paper as well. He points out that he's not the first one to point out critiques within this paper and the methodology, and that there's other institutions, UCSD, and then he cites a few other institutions as well, and including Google's own internal teams in some points that he lays out that can produce like contradictory results to what was laid out in the Journal of Nature paper. And then so in his conclusions, essentially he lays out like multiple conclusions for different parties and different outcomes. And then for chip design itself, essentially what his overall argument is that machine learning isn't to the point yet where it can actually beat human engineering in this regard, and that essentially all papers other than the Journal Nature paper that was put out 2 years ago show that to be true, and that essentially that's the bottom line there for Google. He says essentially that Google should follow their own AI policies, and then lays out what their policies are, and then kind of just like takes Google to task. And then does kind of the same thing to the Journal Nature as well, and says that they should follow their editorial policies, and that they should follow them broadly and rigorously. And then again, gives them their own editorial policies and shows them like how they could go through and actually follow through there. Lots of sources in the paper, total of 56 sources that he gives at the end. So really interesting paper. I'll link the paper in the description to this video here. And so overall big takeaway to me is that don't trust everything that is put out as far as corporate papers and as far as initial research papers for AI. Like so we've seen papers like this now, not just on the corporate side, but there's also the recent one debunking a MIT paper. And so it's the importance of peer review is what makes open source AI development what it is, and why it's critically necessary, in my opinion, to continue that. And so the best way to ensure that that happens outside of specific regulations regulating that all of that occurs is for people to self-regulate, and papers like this that call out people that try to fall outside of those norms and cut corners. So if you like this type of content, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.